Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Zero Hour. I'm your host, Richard RJ Eskow. A few years back, it seemed that all of a sudden, everybody was reading a book called Sapiens by Yuval Harari, subtitled A Brief History of Humankind. A lot of ambition in that subtitle. It purported to tell the story of humanity, and while not brief by any standard definition of the word, it was in fact something that would sit on a shelf, and everybody I knew, or many people I knew, were fascinated by it. I avoided it for some time, and then picked it up and found myself thinking, well, this guy's a good writer. He draws you in. He's highly readable. But after a while, well, I'll let my guest, as she did so ably in her recent article for Current Affairs magazine, give concreteness to what I felt, my increasing sense of disquietude as I continued to read and ultimately did not complete this book, Sapiens. My guest is Darshana Narayanan. She is a neuroscientist and a writer. And the article that she wrote for Current Affairs was headlined, The Dangerous Populist Science of Yuval Noah Harari. It's subtitled The Best, and these are again probably the editor's words, but the best-selling author is a gifted storyteller and popular speaker, but he sacrifices science for sensationalism, and his work is riddled with errors. So first of all, Darshana, thank you so much for coming on the program.
Thank you, Richard. Thanks for having me on the program.
Delightful to have you. And as I began to say in my introduction, first of all, I don't know where to begin. This guy seemed like a pleasant enough companion in recounting the history of humanity and all of this, but I began to grow increasingly uncomfortable with his pronouncements with absolute authority on things that struck me as unknowable, and but not expressed with any sense of we believe that or we think that, or there are those who say, but just simply pronouncements. And also I found myself after a while getting very, very annoyed with, may I say, the white male pronouncement voice. And I am a white male. So, and yet this guy is beloved and admired by people the world over. So apparently I'm the exception in having bailed on his book, aren't I?
I would say this, that I, like you, avoided it for a while and came to it late, but it was spectacularly popular by the time I got around to reading it, and almost immediately started questioning the science, especially his evolutionary biology part. His writing is so vast that I don't think a person from a single field can satisfyingly critique the breadth of what he's written. I did attempt, some parts of it, but yeah, I was immediately struck by, the lack of scientific weight, if you will, and very much like you said, anyone, of course, is welcome and free to speculate, but presenting speculation as certainty, an objective certainty, I think is very problematic in many, many ways, especially when people are treating your book as, scientific nonfiction, and, quoting it, maybe making decisions based on it. That comes with certain responsibility. And it is not to be taken lightly, I think.
Yes, and your article, maybe we'll follow the flow of your article, which is you begin by giving examples of the sort of guru-like status that he's accorded by so many of his followers, and some of the questions you find astonishing. You use the word astonishing, they certainly are. Some of the questions that he's asked 100 years from now, do you think we will still care about being happy? I mean, that's not only a very broad question, but I mean, who the hell knows would be the only rational response to a question like that. One would presume so, since it's human nature to be happy. Studying languages, what I do, is it still relevant, and how do I prepare for the future? What do we want to want? At the end of Sapiens, you said we should be asking the question, what do we want to want? Well, what do you think we should want to want? I mean, this is getting preposterous to me. I mean, this to me is like a parody of cult behavior. Am I being unfair?
There's definitely some of this. I think my favorite of this, the one that really highlights the cult side of it, is the one that says, you as somebody who practices Vipassana, which is a kind of silent meditation, does that help you get closer to the force? Is that where you get closer to the force, right? A question like that really kind of, I think, to me, illustrates the sort of status that he is given. And I, this was not cherry picking in any way. I watched hours of videos, and I could have, filled, and I did for an earlier draft, fill pages and pages of these questions that I found quite startling, amusing if it wasn't so sort of widely taken seriously. But yeah, I think these questions very much highlight both the problem and, sort of the reception that he has received.
Yeah, and that question of yours that you picked out as your favorite. Well, Vipassana meditation obviously is a Buddhist meditational practice. The force is from the Star Wars movies, right? It's not out of any kind of spiritual tradition. Do you happen to remember, it's a trivial question of mine, but I'm given to those from time to time. Do you happen to remember what his answer to that question was?
Yeah, I actually wrote some part of the answer down. He says, if I can't observe the reality of my own breath for 10 minutes, how can I hope to observe the reality of the geopolitical system? So he's saying this, he starts by saying, I practice Vipassana meditation to see reality more clearly. And then says, he does this to sort of observe the reality of the geopolitical system, which is really, I hope, not a way one should get scientific insights and things by, silent meditation. You have to get out into the world and get dirty and experiment and get it wrong and be willing to say you don't know, and say that, we may not have certainty on, things that we would like to have certain answers for. And I think those sorts of answers are hard to hear and maybe less entertaining to hear, honestly.
It's so interesting, Darshana, because that's a cultic answer. And it's not because I have any criticism of Vipassana meditation. I know people who practice it and get great benefit from it. And I've actually tried it myself and, found it a positive experience. But to suggest that one can't understand global affairs until one follows their breath for 10 minutes, I could list a lot of brilliant historians and economists and thinkers of various kinds. I'm just going to go out on a limb and say that probably Noam Chomsky doesn't follow his breath. And, we could name all sorts of people that probably don't and yet have useful insights to share with us. So to me, that's an answer of somebody who's already accepted their status as, you get what I think you get what I'm driving at, don't you?
As guru.
Yes.
Is what I would say. Yeah, most definitely. And to this point, yes, to each his own. I do yoga, which I find incredibly helpful and calming. And, we all have our own ways of staying sane. But I think to another point of yours, this idea that we can expect one human, be it man or woman, to have all of these answers that we, collectively strive to answer, and our world is complex. We can only collectively answer, or sort of collectively decide on our reality, if you will. To have this one person who's an authority on this whole range of topics, and that we would accept that is very problematic.
It is to me, and jumping ahead, and you say his manner is soft-spoken, even shy, and I've seen interviews with him where he does appear to be that way, and I don't mean to pile on this, but there is also kind of a guru's, manner. But he says 100 years from now, it is quite likely that humans will disappear and the earth will be populated by very different beings like cyborgs and artificial intelligence. I've actually done a lot of writing and research and digging into the question of artificial intelligence, talking to computer scientists, other people. You're a neuroscientist. There's a great deal of controversy, as you, I'm sure, know, about whether such a thing as artificial intelligence is even possible, much less within 100 years. And it seems to me, too many people are eager to equate something that sounds like a human with human intelligence, which, I've said it's like arguing that vinyl is an artificial cow, right? It's an output. It's not the essence of the being. But Harari states it as a given and says it's difficult to predict, quote, what kind of emotional or mental life such entities will have. Given that he's followed, as you point out, by people like Bill Gates or whomever, I don't remember, Zuckerberg and these people, then in effect, it's not just a guy who feels free to pronounce on things he doesn't know about, but he could be having a big impact on policy, on corporate decisions that affect everyone based on pseudoscience and pseudo knowledge. Is that a real concern?
It is very much a real concern. And I'll get to that point in a second, because he does have, this is, Sapiens is just the beginning. He has a number of endeavors that plan to, spread the word, if you will. He has a nonprofit called Sapienship that is, poises him to be very influential. Like you said, he has the ear of, all sorts of influential people. But to an earlier point like this, we're very early in the years of grappling with, machine intelligence or artificial intelligence. I don't even think we have like a common definition of what intelligence is, or, in the same way that you ask two neuroscientists to define consciousness, and they'll say very different things. Like these are huge, like meaty concepts that we're grappling with. We invented a game that could beat us at chess, and then we're like, is that really an intelligent system? And then we're like, okay, we'll try Go. Is that really human intelligence? So we're like sort of working through this. I don't think there's any sort of consensus on what intelligence, human intelligence, artificial intelligence, like what we need to accomplish to then, sort of say we have attained this goal. Also, artificial intelligence, I think, captures a very broad bucket of technologies. And there are a lot of computer scientists who study this. There's someone in Princeton I follow very closely called Narayanan, and he's done a very, not related to me, just the same surname, but has done some very detailed analysis of what kinds of systems function really well, like image recognition processing systems, text analysis, the places where we like completely doing so badly, like predicting any kind of human behavior, whether it's hiring or crime propensity, or like, who we will love, or any of these things that Harari very much talks about when he talks about artificial intelligence. In fact, he says that human beings will become obsolete and we will just have to sort of bow down to these greater authorities who by, sort of, that it is our fate that we will be superseded and, sort of taken over or become secondary to these systems.
Well, it seems to me to make a statement like that, Darshana, is to jump past about 4 massive lines we have yet to cross or even understand, right? Because first of all, can we create such a thing as general intelligence in an artificial entity? And do we even need to, for that matter? 2, would we understand if we did? 3, would there be an obligation to subjugate ourselves to it? 4, would it even want our subjugation? All of these are well beyond. We're nowhere near addressing the first of these series of fundamental barriers and questions. It seems to me. Do you have a different view of it?
Yeah, no, I'm absolutely with you on it. It is, of course, fun to speculate and write about what this future might be or think about it. Who doesn't like science fiction?
Sure.
Right? But to talk about it as settled and objective and sort of our necessary path to the future is completely wrong, like you just said.
You know what interests me about this, and I come from more of a social science background, not a hard science like yourself, but what interests me about something like this is that, to me, a figure like Yuval Harari, and then we can talk more about his ideas a little bit, but a figure like that becoming such a guru and such a sort of preacher figure to the Mark Zuckerbergs and IMF leaders and so on of the world, is that public Yuval Harari is kind of a creation of the individual Yuval and society and these figures themselves, right? It's a kind of collaborative creation, much like an artificial intelligence may turn out to be. They've created this public figure together, all of them. And it seems to me the question then becomes, why? And it seems to me that a public, quote unquote, guru figure that, first of all, makes pronouncements: is God real? Is God not real? Why did we get here? Where did we come from? And lastly, we're going to become obsolete. We just need to accept that, and we're going to become subservient to artificial intelligences. Well, I listen to that, I think, well, first of all, no wonder Mark Zuckerberg loves him. And secondly, it fits in with the whole Meta. I mean, all of a sudden, Zuckerberg's new company is Meta. Well, okay, there you go, right? MetaHuman. But it seems to me Harari is not just interesting as Harari, he's interesting as a social phenomenon, isn't he?
I think very much. I think, like you said, we have to ask ourselves why. Why do we need a Harari character, if you will, or a Harari figure? Why do we need this one superhuman who can answer all of these questions? Why the tech industry loves him, I think, is probably a little bit more straightforward. He has been critical of them, but he doesn't poke holes in their worldview, and so he sort of, and given his popularity, he very much, I think, sort of amplified that narrative, and that narrative has been around for a long time. He's a very, I think he's, as a friend said, he's a fantastic intellectual magpie. He picks up pieces. Right. From everywhere and packages them really well. He doesn't credit people, which is another, I think, a really big criticism I have. I think it's good practice to credit the people who have come before you. But what I was, sorry, I lost my train of thought here, but I'll stop here and let you carry on, and then I'm sure.
Absolutely. No, your point about not crediting is well taken. And in fact, if we sort of pick apart his various ideas, this idea that we'll become subservient to artificial intelligence is by no means new. And the fact, in fact, I've done also some reporting on the insider thinking of the tech world. And for many years now, they've believed, one of the reasons why some libertarian tech experts endorse the idea of a universal basic income, not the kind that I might, under the kind of conditions I might endorse it, but just very minimal with no social support net, is because they basically, like the economist Tyler Cohen is one of the advocates of, basically predicts a future where 85% of the population will be irrelevant. And therefore, I'm not saying Tyler puts it this harshly, but therefore, keep them on a minimal income and addicted to, technologies that distract them and keep them pacified. This is the tech industry view. And Tyler is also popular in this world. And I think Yuval Harari takes some ideas from that. And then there'll be 15% who are basically tech, maybe intermediaries would be a way to put it. Yes, I think all of this is very familiar, but the whole. I'm also fascinated by the psychology of it, right? Because to me, there's a sort of personality disorder behind it. I'm sorry to put it this way, but not necessarily even just. I'm not necessarily speaking of Yuval Harari himself, but the whole pattern that as you write, Darshana, from our sweeping saga of the human species, from our humble beginnings as apes to a future where we will sire the algorithms that will dethrone and dominate us. To me, and admittedly, perhaps I have too mystical a turn of personality or something, but I do not believe in a reductionist universe where humans are merely algorithms. And when you write, perhaps I know in one sense we are, but that I just don't believe that, we'll write better algorithms and then we'll be obsolete. Am I overly sentimental?
No, not at all. In fact, like the one thing they consistently leave out in that story is who is building these algorithms and to what end, right? Like we get to construct the future we want. And if these are the narratives that are keeping you up at night with excitement or fear or whatever, if these are this is the sort of future that we see coming or building towards, it's very problematic. I think in some realm it could even be the kind of science fiction that we read or capture us. I know definitely people like Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos. They cite Asimov a lot. His Asimov's Foundation series is about a human who has incredible predictive, or who develops a field that gives us incredible predictive capacity that then single-handedly shepherds us to some future, right? But instead, I don't know, could we be reading Ursula Le Guin, who talks about these really amazing new ways of organizing ourselves that we could come up with, or Octavia Butler, or there are all sorts of stories to draw from. Why are we drawing from the really awful dystopian ones?
Right, no, you're absolutely right. The Isaac Asimov stories, you're speaking of Hari Seldon, who invents something, I'm forgetting what it's called now, futurism or something.
Right, yeah. It's called psychometry or something.
Psychometry, yes.
Of predictive analytics and sociology. But of course, gives you this idea that humans are entirely predictable, that we just need to create the good enough systems to do that.
Although in defense of Asimov, he said that humans were predictable on a mass scale. Whereas some of the others say that and what the pursuit of Silicon Valley is to do is to predict us on an individual scale, which to me is far more dystopian. But by the way, I can't resist telling you, Darshana, that I interviewed Paul Krugman, Nobel-winning economist, who has said that his original inspiration for becoming an economist was Hari Seldon in the Asimov stories. So I reminded him that in the Foundation books, when the empire collapses, it's called the Seldon crisis. And I asked Krugman, is the United States experiencing a Krugman crisis? To which he replied, I'm not that cosmic. So I believe I'm the only journalist to ever get a Nobel Prize winner to utter the phrase, I'm not that cosmic.
Good on you.
Thank you. You also...
Just very quickly, though, I am totally with you on this prediction on a mass scale versus individual. And I think Harari most definitely falls in that sort of pitfall, if you will, over and over again. So, for instance, his prediction about COVID ends up being wrong because it was not created in some ideological objective by a rogue army. But also then goes on to talk about surveillance systems that can look at your heart rate, read your heart rate or blood pressure, things like that, and now predict with great certainty what you're feeling. We don't have, those systems are very, very hard to build. We can broadly, on a mass scale, in average, sort of have some kind of predictive capability. But what you, right, are Richard, who is American and has certain cultural contexts and sort of maybe drank coffee this morning or didn't, or is tired or whatever, like whatever these contexts, even like sort of immediate contexts are, that kind of prediction is very, very hard to do. And so he's very often conflating these two levels of predictive capability, I think, which is very important to make the distinction for.
Oh, I think that's so important. I'm so glad you brought that up. And in that sense, you can, now you do use the term science populist to describe him, populist, and you compare clinical science, psychologist Jordan Peterson, you use that term for him as well. I would just slightly, Darshana, object just in that as an old leftist, populist used to be an honored term for leftist organizing in the 19th century. I'm not that old, but in the 19th century, it's been co-opted by the right. I would suggest it's a kind of science authoritarianism, really, almost totalitarianism. And it fits to what you were just saying about the inability to recognize individual variation within averages. It seems to me that what he misses, and what's the desire that's expressed in this way of seeing the universe, is almost a lack of tolerance for individual variation and the unpredictability on the individual level that makes us human. Do you get what I'm driving at?
Oh, totally. A disregard for our humanity, right? For our individual humanity in such broad, sweeps. It is both sad and maddening in some way. But yeah, you're entirely right. And I absolutely understand your hesitation to endorse the science populist term, not endorse, but like your
right, of course, yeah.
And I like the science authoritarianism. I hadn't thought about it, but I think now that I do, a lot of the same traits. What leads to authoritarianism or successful authoritarianism is a lot of the same traits that I discussed. Right, you're sort of weaving these yarns around, like facts, not necessarily facts. I say facts in quotes, but you're sort of seducing people into a narrative that's often fear-based. I add Jordan Peterson in there. I know he doesn't entirely beat by beat fit into that category, but he often does the same. I think the worldview comes ahead and then the science is used to sort of like kind of explain this worldview, right? So for instance, he uses, and I haven't read him as extensively, but he uses like lobster social hierarchies to justify, like human social hierarchies, which, where do the details line up? So these, I think in those kinds of ways, I think there is some similarity. But yeah, it's, we're like seduced not by the power of their truth or scholarship, like I've written, but their storytelling, which they're very good at.
Well, yes, although I would have to think about Peterson more. I understand the connection absolutely, but it seems to me he makes a specialty out of, I can't say, I'm not an expert, but I've seen him make a specialty out of the oddly specific, like the lobsters is one, but also I saw him once say that, well, women wear blush on their face to simulate a state of sexual attraction, and therefore it should be acceptable that men flirt with them, and they should not object to that because they're signal, they're a very odd kind of oddly specific, deeply inappropriate and incorrect, but based on, a very kind of specific choice there. That's, whereas Harari, it seems to me, is going so wide that nobody can challenge, but I'm no Peterson expert. You mentioned I'm sorry, go ahead.
Just really quick. Sorry. I think when you say this, I guess the question that you asked earlier comes to mind. Why do we need figures like this? And maybe some similarity in them lies in these like definitive answers they give, right? It's sort of, in presenting these answers, maybe there's some way of dealing with chaos there's sort of a helpful hand in, which is some of the things I've been thinking about is, why do we, as you ask, why do we need these characters? And maybe there is some similarity between the two, because I know Jordan Peterson is also very popular for his very forthright, definitive answers to some very strange things.
In that sense, I think you're absolutely right. I think the comparison is absolutely apt. People love Peterson because a certain category of a very different population, I think, but because he provides answers that, he ties it all together. He makes people comfortable. He's a guru to them as well. And so I think he is a reassuring figure in that way, I guess. And, maybe we can, close on this. I guess what frightens me in a way more about Yuval Harari is he seems to me to be a Jordan Peterson for liberals. Most of the people, of course, I don't, my social set is not a cross-section of global society, but it's nobody's is, but it seems to me the people I know who have glommed onto his books and then bought the next one, then bought the next one, smart people, good people I agree with on most issues, but they just feel, oh, okay, now it's all being put into context for me. And I feel that is insidious. Because, as his thesis advisor, who you quote in your piece, says, when you make these global pronouncements about everything, like who can fact check you? I'm paraphrasing, but who can fact check you on everything, right? I mean, nobody's an expert in quote unquote everything. So you get away with, pronouncements you wouldn't get away with if you said, and in the Battle of Antietam, there were, 65,000 casualties. You're either right or wrong, but you start talking. So what worries me is that this sort of mechanistic, reductionist, mansplaining everything else, sort of Davos, world-devouring mindset is being sort of, to use a Silicon Valley, a metaphor, is like being virally implanted onto the hard drives of like nice people.
I like that visual. As scary as that is, I think here, blame is a very hard word, but I think here the problem rests not with the people who read him or Harari himself, really. It's like the system that allows this, right? One of the things that really shocked me in doing this, and I had no idea before, is that the nonfiction book industry does not have fact checking. They don't require it. They don't internally do it. They leave it up to the writer to hire their own fact checkers and do it. And so people are consuming these books as nonfiction without there being any, fact checking happening. So I think that is a huge problem. And often when I talk to people and I say, oh, he mixed up cheetahs and leopards, or there's some section of people who are like, oh, who cares? But there are people who are like, oh, I didn't realize that there's just so many mistakes in this, right? They're presuming that there is some due diligence that has gone into this book that is being sold as science and nonfiction and, is doing so well and so lavishly praised. I think the second is that we really do need scientists to not kind of forego that space to people like Harari. The academic system leaves no space for scientists to step out into the outside world, right? We're not trained to sort of use narrative, or we are in some respect, and being unfair to say we're absolutely not, but narrative is important in science, whether you're like speaking to other scientists or not. But I think we should be trained better to engage with the public. It should be encouraged. I know universities try this a little bit, but the academic system is punishing. It's a tightrope. it's brutally competitive to get into grad school, and then you do very long, at least in my fields, endless postdocs, and then you get a faculty job, and then you're working towards tenure. And at no process is a popular book helpful. In fact, it takes time away from the things that take you to your next point, right? And so that space is ceded to the detriment of, I think, like humanity in general, to people like Yuval Harari. And so I think in this respect, we need to question the systems that we have set up and do better for all of us, really.
I feel like that's a fantastic point, and maybe should be your next piece, because in a sense, the academic track beats the plain language out of you. It almost turns you into an artificial intelligence. And I'd love to, read your thoughts about that in print, because I think it's super important. And I would like to see more scientists explaining their work in plain English. And I'll just close with this. I mean, I think I went off the rails with Harari, not because of any beliefs of my own, but when I was somewhere early in the book, he says, well, people began to believe in God around this era, and there is no God, but they began to, I saw that phrase, there is no God. And I thought, well, like, okay, this has been a matter of wars and contention for thousands of years, but now Yuval Harari has settled it. And then I thought, okay, but who says you're the guy to settle this after, you know what I mean? It's like,
absolutely.
It's like that. That's funny. It just struck me. Look, that's weird.
It's a matter of authority and, who, right. how he earned it or not, or, who has given him that authority and why.
Exactly. I'm sure he's a very nice man.
Have that kind of authority on all of these subjects. Is that good for anybody, this planet, anyone?
Yeah. Exactly. And I'm sure he's a lovely man, and I don't mean anything against him personally, but I think for society,
I think he's a great writer. It's just, we need to be able to question where this comes from and if it is really objective or science-based as he claims it is.
Well said. And so thanks for writing this article. I once again remind people that it's in Current Affairs magazine, which is currentaffairs.org. The title, The Dangerous Populist Science of Yuval Noah Harari, and my guest has been Darshana Narayanan. So, again, thank you for writing it, and thank you for a delightful conversation.
Richard, it was so fun to chat with you. Thank you so much for having me on.
And with you, it was a pleasure. And we'll be right back after this. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour.